Hey, welcome back to another episode of Bitcoin Reformation Podcast. Three pastors talking about Bitcoin and especially a little bit about how the church might think about Bitcoin. Today, I'm as always with Jared and David. So, David, how are things your way? Last time we were recording, we were wondering if you were going to make it, as there were all kinds of warnings about Big Bear Valley. You're still in your cabin.
Yes, last time I think I started recording with you, and then we literally had to stop and have me bug out, and then you went on to start over and recorded the episode without me. So that would have been 2 Wednesdays ago from now. A little off the calendar here with our listeners who can hear this anytime. But on a Wednesday, yes, suddenly we evacuated the mountain as the west end of the valley had gone to a full evacuation order. There's 3 roads off our mountain here, and 2 were closed down. And we just said, "Hey, let's get out of here." And the air quality was bad. The sunlight had gone to orange. It was like living in Mordor. So you're just kind of anxious, if I can put it that way. For any Midwesterner listeners, which is where I grew up, we think of these fires that threaten our community every couple of years as like the slowest moving tornadoes you've ever been worried about. So we left and had a couple of lovely days on a neighboring mountain 2 hours away called Idlewild, California. Much more of an arts and crafts town, no lake in the midst of it. So a mountain town, similar elevation, and yet feels so different. It was kind of enjoyable. We went from feeling like we were running for safety to feeling like a few days of vacation, other than the fact that it was interrupting things like podcasts and more to my daily life, my actual work life. It was a really disruptive week, but we're back. They've got the fire like 60 or 70% contained, but still there's three plus thousand people, nearly 4,000 people working on the fire. It's this small army as little as 5, 6 miles away, and for the most part, you don't see them, other than you can go to the grocery store and suddenly there's a crew of young firefighters, kind of dirty, coming off the fire line from places like Santa Barbara or Ventura County, and they're at the grocery store grabbing calories, right? And you thank them, and you realize also they're living a young man's dream, and in many cases, a young woman's dream, and they're making a lot of overtime. So God bless them and their work, but that's life here, getting back to normal. Fall setting in. We had our first snow and sleet storm then last Friday night. Within a week, we went from evacuating because of fire to having a snow sleet storm, which was very, very welcome, as you can imagine. Put some moisture on the hills and on the fire. So that's us here in Southern California. Again, I'm thinking it's a vision of Southern California that is different than most of us think about when we think of Southern California living.
Jared, how are things for you?
Things in Pennsylvania are turning into fall here. By the time this gets out, it'll probably be full fall. So that means cooler mornings in the 50s or so, highs in the 70s. If I could live somewhere where it was like this every week, every day, I would. That would just be beautiful, wonderful. Things are going well too. Big thing in my life too, family wise anyway. So try not to make a long story longer, but our family had received a call to go to a different place in Minnesota to go serve at a different church. We believe God works through people to do that sort of stuff. And so we have since declined that. So we're going to stay where we are and serve here in Pennsylvania. So news to even David and Ben. We had told our church just this past weekend that was our decision that we made. So kind of a exciting, I'm going to be here and I'm going to stay here. Do the stuff that I'm here to do. So exciting that way. Clarity is good. It's one of those nice, peaceful, somewhat moments. I won't lie. I was telling Emily, I kind of expected a little bit more relief. And I told my dad, yeah, it really made me start to wonder, what do I really want to do the rest of my life? Is this exactly what I want to do? And could I do other things? And he just said, yeah, get used to that feeling. It's always there. So thanks, Dad, for that very comforting, really assuring statement. But other than that, I feel like my job, as I say almost every time we meet together, is to provide kid stories. So our our youngest is now 14 months, I think, or so. And so he's walking around, running around all over the place. But we think his most recent desire is basically to have a death wish in every single thing that he does. So I was doing the dishes the other day. Mom and Zoe were somewhere else, and I turned around and he had climbed up into like a shopping cart, so that then he could reach something on the counter. So really skillful. And then later, it was the next day or something like that, I was in the bathroom getting ready for the morning and looked over there, and he had knocked over his we keep all of our reusable diapers in a trash can next to the toilet. And he had knocked it over so that he could stand on the trash can to then get onto the top of the toilet and stand on the lid. Just like every single time we turn around, leave him to his own desires, he is standing on something, looking like he's about to jump down the stairs, thinking he can walk like his big sister, or somewhere in between. So it's it is both fun and
I love it.
Absolutely terrifying at the same time to be around him too. So that's what's going on in my world. Ben, how about you in sunny St. Louis, right?
It hasn't been too sunny here the last couple of days, kind of dreary St. Louis, but yeah, things are well here. Our oldest is away at a camp so they take seniors in high school and they use them as staff for a sixth grader camp. And so Aiden's away at that. So it starts to feel a little bit like what it will feel like next year when he's off to college. And we're still very much in the college hunt. He's working on college essays and all that kind of stuff. New in my world is that I basically go from this room to my bedroom and sometimes to the living room in my home. And that is like my entire existence. So every once in a while I'll get out for a run, but I'm headed out for a couple of days for some travel. I haven't traveled at all in September, and I told my wife yesterday I'm actually looking forward to it just to get out of the house. So yeah, it's really fun in so many ways. I absolutely love working from home in so many respects, but it is also a little bit. I'm the kind of person that always enjoys getting out of the house on Saturdays and stuff. So I'm kind of not really a homebody. So it's taking a little bit of getting used to, but not much of anything to complain about. Family's doing well, so yeah, we're off to a good start to the school year. So hey, let's turn our attention to the topic of the day, and we're going to let Jared take it away.
Right. So I am really excited for this episode, for you, listener, and for us to just have this conversation together, guys. I mean, I think it's going to be great. I want to sort of give a couple of sort of, hey, this is what we're doing, this is not what we're doing sort of thing. So we record all of our episodes, I think, with the mindset that hoping everybody would listen to all of them, right? That it's sort of a sequential thing, like hey, we're trying to make these building blocks along the way. But I think what we're going to try and do here is offer maybe a unique one opportunity. Hey, if you are a church finance person, if you want your church finance team to think about Bitcoin, that hopefully over the next 50-ish minutes or so, we can kind of convince you or make a case for it, for why you might think about Bitcoin. And so part of that is going to be a lot of charts and graphs. And so, we'll explain a little bit about what's going on the screen as far as what we're looking at. This is going to be one of those episodes that if you're listening to it just via podcast, it would probably be a good one to come over to YouTube and check out so that you can really see what we're talking about, all those sort of things. So again, we are just three pastors, right? We're not giving investment advice, so to say. We are presenting a case for you why we might make some of those decisions. And so we are not professional investment advisors. Please do not take what we say as investment advice, but merely presenting what might be some knowledge, information that you could use as you talk to your church finance committee, all those sort of things. So with that in mind, I'm going to entitle our talk today, or our conversation, Preserving the Past and Empowering the Future. Preserving the past and empowering the future, kind of how Bitcoin makes that work. But before we even go there, we need to start with the question, why does money matter in ministry? why does money matter in ministry? Or why does money matter for a nonprofit? Even let's expand the scope even that much bigger too. So I will kick it to both of you. Why does money matter for ministry and or for a nonprofit?
I'll give a go to that. I mean, I think obviously it money is part of taking care of workers. Paul said that the worker is worth his keep, and that we shouldn't muzzle the grain while it's treading out the muzzle the ox while it's treading out the wheat or the grain, right? So the idea of putting a muzzle on so that the ox can't eat the crop that's in the field while it's pulling the plow. That would be a not a very humane thing to do. Much the same for workers. That all of us could work for free and be independently wealthy for so that we could serve the ministries that we serve and do so completely uh, without any cost, like Paul did. Right? He covered all of his costs as a tent maker, but most of us can't do that. So it's important to take care of workers. Um, so I'll leave it at that for now. I do think that we should come back to why have a reserve fund, which is kind of a particular question, but that's a first answer. David, any thoughts?
Yeah, as the former pastor and director now of development for a nonprofit, a Christian nonprofit, there's a real diagnostic function that money represents then for a nonprofit, and it might also be true for the church. And what I mean by that is this: a nonprofit, you would think, as well as the church, has a mission, right? Can clearly state that mission. And then the question, at least a couple questions, come right on the heels of that. One is, does the world need this mission? And the only people that can answer that is other people. You can't find that written in the sky. Of course, our source for our mission isn't other people when it comes to the church, but God Himself. And we could talk about what that mission is of the church. We could talk about things like mission creep, you know, all that. But the question is, do people resonate with your mission? And then the other half of that diagnostic is maybe they resonate with your mission, but they don't think you're actually carrying out your mission. So at the point where somebody at a nonprofit level joins you, typically it's not for all of the reasons that can be at play at a church. At a church, some other reasons can come in, such as my grandpa built this place, and gosh darn, I'm going to keep it going. Or you could say, well, the tithe. Let's talk about tithing, 10%. I'm told I must. I mean, I would really want to have that conversation, quite frankly. It seems to me that the Church of the New Testament, the Church of the Resurrection, actually, by and large, many instances gave a heck of a lot more than 10%. They were freed from doing that. Make it a full law, and people might give 10%, but they likely won't give more than 10% if it's the law. I mean, the IRS, by way of the law, takes so many taxes from me. I've never offered to give them more. I try to avoid those taxes. So back to it though. Do we like your mission, and do we think you're about the business of your mission in a way that now I, as a donor, a giver, a supporter, want to become all of those things, but possibly a better descriptor still is I want to become a partner with you in your mission. We have a wonderful donor. She and her husband used to live in Michigan. Now they're in Tennessee. She told me a couple of years ago, she said, David, you all are really good at doing what you're doing, and we couldn't do that. But my husband and I, we're really good at making money. And together, this is a beautiful partnership. That's why we give. So money can represent that. It is a test of both your mission as well and whether you're carrying out your mission, I would say. Again, at the church level, it's not, maybe it should be that clear. It's not always that clear. People give for a variety of reasons. But that would be my answer to it, particularly from the seat I sit in here today as a director of development for a nonprofit organization. And finally, when all that happens, yes, the bills get paid and the workers get paid as well, which is very important.
I think the part that I would add here is that money empowers whatever the vision is, right? That it is whether it's the workers, whether it's the we give encouragement baskets, we call that, to every new mom that is born that has a baby at one of the local hospitals, and it's the dollars that go towards those things. Like, money empowers the mission of whatever organization, whether it's a church or a nonprofit as well. That some ways, yes, could a nonprofit exist that doesn't have money? Sure, theoretically, but at the end of the day, most things that we do, most things that we are at work at in the world require some sort of money, whether it's money to pay someone to do something good. So we're going to frame houses here this Saturday in our parking lot that are going to get sent then to be built. All of those things require money to be done. And so when we think about why is money important for ministry, why is money important for a nonprofit, I would say simply, it makes the thing go. And so because of that, we can't just say money doesn't matter or it's not important. Because if money is doing those things, if it's paying people, if it's buying the goods and services that we need to do our job, to do our vision, then we actually almost need to be more concerned about it. Because the more that we have, the more ministry that might get done. Now, is that discounting volunteers? Is that discounting people giving of other, resources? No, absolutely not. But imagine that day, David. What if somebody came to you and said, "Hey, I've got $500,000. What do you think you can do with it?" Like that, and same thing. Come to a pastor. "Hey, I've got $50,000. What do you got?" That would blow people's minds usually, right? And so.
That's a hypothetical, right? You're not telling me.
No, David, we all know if I had $500,000, what I would do with it. I think that's pretty clear from our conversations. But the point is still the same, right? That we can't just dismiss this out of hand. And so if you're on a finance committee, I would assume that you're sitting in the chair that you are because someone else thinks you know about money, or you know a lot about money, or that you care about it. But we can't assume, right? So we have to start from a place of knowing that money is important, that we can't just dismiss it out of hand and say nothing about it. Go ahead, Ben.
I just want to say a little bit about why reserves, I think, are so important. And I've really appreciated this conversation around mission and vision. So, Dave Ramsey talks about how every family should establish an emergency fund of at least 3 months of salary, just because stuff happens in life, right? A family member has to go to the hospital unexpectedly, or a car breaks down, or a tree falls on a portion of the house, or who knows, whatever. Nobody plans for emergencies. But so Dave Ramsey wants individuals not to have to take on a huge loan if they get into financial turmoil. How much more important then is it for ministry organizations that have a super important mission and vision to accomplish that maybe no other organization or ministry is going to do that in the community, or if your ministry has a really particular niche that not many other ministries are accomplishing? How important it is then to establish some reserves so that if some things happen, the mission and vision continue. And so, and especially I think about this at PLI, we're running an organization that has, I don't know, 6 or 7 full-time workers and then a whole bunch of part-time workers. That's a serious stewardship, right? All those people are basically looking to PLI we've partnered with them to say, we're going to take care of your livelihood in exchange for you giving your full-time hours to the mission and vision of PLI. So it's really important to me that we take that charge of caring for those families that are full-time workers, part-time workers for us so seriously. So um, I I would just highly encourage. I think 6 months for a ministry is a great reserve, and maybe it should be even more, 6 months of your annual budget. Maybe it needs to be a year. I think that's just good stewardship so that you can expect the unexpected.
And Ben, if I might approach that same thing. So we're, Jared, you framed this in terms of we're talking to whoever's listening to us, first of all, but second of all, we're hoping that maybe this conversation would attract those who are in leadership of some churches and nonprofits to give some consideration that maybe they haven't to this point. Of particular consideration, as Ben, you just outlined, is the idea of reserve. And this is my experience from a few places I've been, sort of gathering pieces. And if I can present that as a whole, it's still a little bit anecdotal, but here's the anecdote. Here's my lived experience that likely at each of those places we'd be more comfortable with saying, I think we're secure in the day of need because we have a line of credit, which is to say we can charge it, as opposed to, I think we're good for the day of trouble because we've actually prepared and planned for it. And if we're more comfortable with borrowing money to get through a rough patch than spending reserves, well, I'm just hoping me saying that out loud could get somebody to sit back in their seat and say, yeah, maybe that's a little upside down. Maybe having found within myself that I don't like that that's true of me or the church I'm a part of serving. Yeah, okay. Maybe now I'll give you that ear to listen. Because if you're going to borrow on the day to get out of trouble, now you're in double trouble, right? You've got to somehow recapture maybe the regular dollars that were flowing in that you didn't have, and you've got to make up the ground you just borrowed from. Why not, in a different way, prepare for such a day? So I can say this, having been a pastor in the Michigan district of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod for 16 years, two different churches, our district recommended to churches as well to have 3 to 6 months of reserve on hand. And that was a good recommendation.
So money matters, reserves are good and helpful. But I think, David, you almost led us right into I think, the next question. Almost.
Oh, almost.
What do you think is, or what would you say in your experience, is a church or a nonprofit's biggest fear when it comes to money itself? When it comes to reserves, when it comes to investing, when it comes to just dealing with money, short of something that goes in and out in the same day?
I think sustainability is a huge consideration. So uh, that's part of our one of the kind of four, we talk about four mountains that PLI must climb, to kind of as a way to talk about four strategies or objectives, and sustainable financial future is part of our charge. So I think it's important so that you can sustain the ministry. We know that training our ministry at PLI is developing leaders. So that's not a quick just kind of drop food in and then fly off to the next place. That's walking with leaders over a long amount of time. So sustainability is hugely important for the work that we do.
There's, I don't know. Not to I don't disagree with what Ben said at all. Just taking a different tact in terms of the answer to it. I think your average Christian has no reservations about the idea of, in their home, with their household, having cash reserves for the day of emergency. They have no problem with it. They might have problems with actually accomplishing it, but conceptually, not a problem. We all see the value in that and wish we would do that. I have seen where there's reservations in doing so in some churches because sort of there's I'll call it a pious fear, which might, well, in this case, be a misplaced fear, that to have reserves on hand is somehow trusting in ourselves and not in the Lord, or is somehow a false stewardship of the real time dollars given to kind of store them up. And I don't mean to turn this into a full gospel Bible study, but Jesus told some parables that if not studied well, if not understood well, could lead to such pious sentiments where we as a church, or maybe as an individual, I don't know, I just think it happens more at the church or ministry level, that there's reservations with this idea of reserve anything. Reserve anything. Does that resonate with you guys? I'm seeing some heads shaking.
Yeah, I mean, at St. Luke, we are very blessed to have a couple of very large endowments, and it's like we almost operate with the other. We're trying to push back against the how much can we store up before it's unfaithful sort of thing, like a how much do we need question, if you will. And I would definitely say that I've seen maybe the opposite of that too. Like it's the whole reason why life insurance was not, a good thing in the LCMS was you're not trusting in the Lord to provide, so you can't get life insurance. And now we're in a different place now where we say that it's okay to have life insurance. God works through life insurance to provide, and that's good and right too. So, one more question, or let me say this: what I think the biggest fear is before we go any further, especially when it comes to anything that is not just going to stay in a bank account and then get put to a bill. So I'm talking about if you're going to store something, right? So if it's an endowment, if it's hey, we're going to leave this somewhere, are you putting it in a bank that's getting 0%? Are you putting it in CDs, stuff like that? The things that I keep hearing all the time are things like we want to not lose money. We want to preserve the capital of people that gave in the past, that we want to make sure we're good stewards of what those people who have gone before us have given to us, right? That they've entrusted their work, their time, their energy, and money. And it's our job now to sort of maintain that and to keep that as it is. And so for the rest of the time, we're going to kind of, I think, tear that down a little bit, break it apart, and maybe present to you, listener, a different fear, if you will, or a different reason for looking at how we do this thing called saving or putting things away for a future day. And so to lead us into that, here we go. This is like I'm launching you a softball here, guys. Explain to the listener why and what is a denominator when we talk about that, and why is asking the question, what is the denominator, an important thing to think about when we think about it's stewarding people's funds, investing them. Why does the denominator matter?
David, do you want to go?
You got this, Ben?
I think this is where you're going. The denominator being, typically we think of the U.S. dollar as at least in the United States, for ministries in the United States and in many places around the world, even the U.S. dollar is kind of a gold standard, if you will. Where that term comes from actually matters a lot. Because the U.S. dollar is specifically not the gold standard, is not on a gold standard, but the denominator matters because if the purchasing power of the dollar is not what it used to be, inflation, then you have a problem. So if proverbial Grandma Schmidt gives $100 in 2024, will that $100 be worth the same 20 years from now? Clearly not, right? Because the Fed has said it won't be. The Fed has kind of promised that they've said now that their target for inflation is not 2%, but maybe close to 3%. So every year, Grandma Schmidt's $100 is worth 3% less than when she gave it. Is that what you were looking for, Jared?
Absolutely. You just hit a home run. Bottom of the ninth, bases loaded, right? So here I think is maybe where we start to see, or at least offer a different frame. So I think the people in, call it the pew, the people on any sort of, hey, we're looking at the numbers, right, on that yearly voters meeting, if you will. And here comes the finance part. Everybody's nervous about it. What people are looking for is that the dollar on that whatever account it is either the same or is going up. And that primarily what we are interested in is that by tomorrow, by next year, that if we had $100, that it's got to be at least 110 or 120. That at a sort of base core thing, we fear that number going down, right? And so, hey, if it goes to 90, well, then we must have done something wrong. And we look at that frame through everything that we do then. And that affects all the things that we do with our money, right? And so if I'm a church and I've got money sitting away, well, some people will say we need to make sure that we don't take on any risk so that we don't lose any money. And that's fine. You can have that. But that's a way to think about it, with the dollar as the denominator and not something else. And so
or if I can jump in, the implication of that is that the dollar is safe. The implication is that the dollar is solid. It's not going anywhere. Now, we could mean different things by going anywhere, like the dollar totally collapses. Well, I don't think that's happening anytime soon, but the dollar is going somewhere. Its purchasing power has been going down. We think of it more often as the prices of things going up, but the dollar has been going somewhere. And to your point, Ben, as well, with the Fed saying before, we target and we promise 2% inflation on average per year. And now they've just said that 3% is the new 2%. They have promised us that the dollar is going places. And to then kick it back to you, Jared, I would just say that the dollar is not then monetarily, just this is mathematics, is not so safe as all of us just accepted growing up.
Right.
The other thing, just real quick, that I would add, going back to the beginning of this conversation, where I really appreciate how this conversation started, finance committees have to be thinking, of course, they're thinking about the denominator and about the numbers of dollars, but what they're really thinking about is ensuring the future of the ministry and an expansion of the mission and vision. And so if you look at it that way, an expansion of the mission and vision, then actually the denominator is less important, right? Because the most important thing is our ministry expanding? Are we continuing to reach out in more ways to more people? Could we bring more people on staff? That would be that's a big picture way of looking at the charge of a finance committee.
Absolutely. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I want to show you a few things. I think we referenced these in our how Bitcoin solves every American's purchasing power episode way back there. So if you want to go watch that one, go right ahead. But I want to show these just to kind of prove our point, right? So this is a chart from 2018, so it's outdated now because I'm sure all those things are gone up even higher. But what we're looking at here is we're looking at the ways in which things have gotten more expensive. But in our context, what we're saying is that denominator of the US dollar has gotten us less things, right? We have been able to purchase less things to contribute towards our mission, towards our vision, as we serve, as we do what we're here to do. So a few more charts about that very same thing. This is the average price of beef since 1985, right? Now well over $5. that $100 that lady gave in 1985 could have bought in almost 100 pounds of beef. Now you're going to get 20, right? Significantly less per dollar for ministry. Same thing for bread, right? From 1985 to today, like more than double, triple the same amount of cost. The same for a house, right? Ministry usually takes place in some building, and the cost to build those buildings, the cost to buy those buildings, the cost to do ministry in a certain particular place also has risen. And so what does this mean, if you will, for and then we got one about the money supply. So what does this mean for ministry, though? Why should you care about this, finance person? Well, then our job now as a finance committee is actually, I would say, almost much more difficult, because now our job is not just to make sure that that number continues to go up, that we just don't want to have a zero, and now our job is to maintain, and Ben, I like what you said, like even maximize our dollars for the sake of ministry, that we have to keep up, if you will, with what it cost when someone gave, to then be able to continue to use those funds for whatever mission and vision that we're doing.
Jared,
so go ahead, Ben.
Can you go back to that first slide for a second? Because I think this is extra important for finance committees, right? Is when you think about their charge, they're particularly thinking about how to cover the costs for a worker. And so healthcare and probably very likely, if they're thinking about a pastor, they're thinking about a pastor that might have kids in college or headed to college, or grandkids headed to college. They should be thinking about the cost of homes, and the chart that you showed with the cost of homes going up. I read yesterday that the average price of a home is now 7 times the average household income in the U.S. So 7 times what the average household income is what the average home price is. That's insane that somebody would spend 7 times their take-home pay to purchase a home. And so just things for finance committee to realize, if their charge is not just how many dollars do we have in an account, but how are we taking care of the ministry, they have to be paying attention to not only how's their investment account doing, but they need to be paying attention to how much is the dollar worth, and the cost of basic goods for their workers.
And so when we think about what the job is, then to me, this is the risk has been misplaced. The quote, I want to make sure that I want to live a worthy life. My life has meaning. Usually the opposite of that is I don't want to do something that doesn't matter, right? I'd rather live a life of doing something that mattered, instead of then finding out one day what I did wasn't that important. And so in the same sense here, our job or our goal here is to say, hey, maybe we've misplaced what the real fear here is, and that it's a different thing than we thought, that it's not about having the most dollars in our bank account, but that what we need to be concerned about is the purchasing power of whatever we have to be able to do our mission and our vision. So let's be super practical here. In imaginary world, I have the actual information, just didn't have a time to like put it out into a spreadsheet. But let's imagine that Grandma Schmidt gave $100,000 way back when, right, to, Wrath of God Lutheran Church is always this sort of joking example that we do too. So
I've never heard it.
It's a good
That's
one.
Great.
So anyway, she gave that money to the church and expected them to be good stewards of that. And most of us would say that their job was to keep that money, at least keep the core purchasing power of it, and continue to hold it, if you will, over the years and do whatever she wanted you to do with it. But now our goal is, hey, we need to make sure that whatever she gave us $100,000 in 1985 is just as worth just as much in 2024 than it was then. And so now that is just such a different way to think. And I would say it's a little bit more complex and more difficult to think about, but it frames things in a much more actionable way, a much more clear way. Because then the question isn't about, well, hey, how do we make sure we don't lose all of our money? How do we make sure we, only get as little as we can or keep it safe? The question is, how can we take this and continue to preserve it through the years, and knowing that we can't just let it sit there, so to say. And so the question, I think, is we have to move out of the mindset of that cash is king, right? So I'm hopefully going to sit down. I have one meeting scheduled with someone here at St. Luke, and hopefully another one, because it was brought up that Pastor Jared's a Bitcoin guy, and someone in the room said, "Hey, well, cash is king. We want to hold cash. Cash is king." And so what I would say to that person, and as we sort of offer to you too, that what we've just showed you is a reason to maybe question, a reason maybe to wonder, is cash really king? Is cash really king? Is it really going to maintain my purchasing power, allow me to do my mission and vision stuff? And even things like CDs, bonds, all those sort of things, are those good enough, if you will, to maintain our purchasing power over the years? David?
Yeah, I love it when I come at something with one perspective and somebody shows me gently, humbly, and not in a I got you sort of way, but that my perspective actually was narrower than reality itself. So, for instance, I'm going to guess that cash is king for a lot of church finance folks, pastors, ministers, church workers as well, because we think to ourselves that that's the only thing the church has ever owned. The church has never invested in other assets. And that's where I would say, is that true that the church doesn't believe in investing in other assets? Please then do tell me, what is this property that we're sitting on right now and this building that we're in? Let's go back to, we started talking about in our personal time about forest fires and tornadoes. I mean, we spiritually know that should the building be wiped out, should the property be lost, that the church still exists, right? It is not the essence of the church. Well, what is it then? It's something that for the life of the church, the regular life of the church, the people have valued. Why? Not because it's essential. One thing is needful, and that is Christ. And he has given himself to us. We have the one thing needful, but having the one thing needful, we are then freed to talk about a lot of things that then might well be helpful to our life together and our mission and work. And it's under the rubric of helpful that most churches have property and have buildings and care for their buildings and expand their buildings. So I would want to, first of all, maybe challenge the imagination of those who are overseeing the finances of the church to say, I think we might be nervous about moving beyond dollars because we think we're breaking some sort of paradigm or setting some sort of precedent. I would suggest, no, that precedent has already been established, that we have shown ourselves to be free to invest in and have hold of things that are helpful to our life together under this gospel of Jesus Christ. And in light of that, is the dollar the most helpful thing available to us? And that's just a reframing of the discussion, I think. And I don't mean to rob the direction you're going in. I meant for that to be complimentary, Jared. So I'll stop talking, though. What do you think?
Well, I was even going to offer just a little bit of a personal perspective on this. So to get real personal, and this is not to throw anybody into the bus, but I started ministry in Boca Raton, Florida in 2005, 3 years before the housing market blew up. And partly it blew up because of places like Boca Raton, Florida, places like Southern California. And what was crazy was that I was entering into a salary that made sense in a lot of ways. It made a lot of sense for what the housing market had been like 15 or 20 years prior, where you could buy a very modest 3-bedroom, 2-bath house as kind of a starter home, and it was $150,000, something like that, and it wasn't maybe 3 or 4 times the average salary, and so it was very doable, right, for a beginning worker to buy a modest 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. But in 2005, you couldn't even buy a 2-bedroom condo for that, much less a 3-bedroom house. And what was interesting to me as a young worker was that the 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 finance committee, they were all in those homes that they purchased 20 years prior, and they just weren't up to speed on how crazy the housing market had gotten. It wasn't their fault that the housing market was crazy, but they did have a responsibility to be aware of these kinds of things in their community, and to um, their credit, there were a number of people that really were aware of this and said we have to think creatively. But the idea of like there's a right number of dollars to offer to a new worker because it has to fit our salary matrix. The problem was the salary matrix was outmoded, and it didn't follow things like cost of living index and some of those kind of things. So it's just a very personal example of how difficult it was for me starting in ministry in a place where inflation was rampant, and people were still kind of thinking about what's the right dollar amount rather than what kind of way of life do we want to offer our worker.
So, with all of that in mind, I want to try and make a turn. So, listener, I would hope that you have heard me not say the word Bitcoin really at all yet, right? That we are trying to just raise a maybe different frame to think about how we think about reserves, how we think about investing. And so let's imagine that there is something that you could have, that you could buy, that you could hold, that you don't have to worry about any sort of ethical concerns about, a company that is doing, things that maybe you don't agree with, that you don't have to worry about them diluting your share of value in that very thing, that you don't have to worry about the ways in which other people are thinking about that thing, that no one has centralized control over that. That what if there's a thing that actually doesn't just keep your purchasing power, but actually increases it and allows you to do more ministry, not just maintain it? What if there's something that outpaces inflation, that it keeps with the purchasing power from many years from the past and into the future too? And so obviously we're going to talk about what Bitcoin is and how it fits all of those things. So to do that, I want to show you a few different charts here. First, we're going to go here and we're going to make a comparison in a few different ways. So lots of squiggly lines here. Let me explain to you what you're looking at. So this is a classic denominator conversation now, basically. So what you see before you are 4 different, what I would say, traditional assets held by churches, by people, and denominated in Bitcoin. So you have QQQ, which is a good reference for the stock market, right? So this is equity stuff. There's gold on here. That is, it says gold on the screen. You can see that there, the red line. DXY, that's the value of the dollar. And then TLT, we would consider that as the bonds of the government sort of thing. So what you're looking at here is a 5-year chart from early 2020 through today, or at least through September, comparing all of those things, denominating them in Bitcoin. And so what I want you to see here, the takeaway is, hey, if you tell me I need to preserve purchasing power, then hey, isn't that what gold bugs have said that I need to do? Shouldn't I just buy some gold then? Well, I would say you could, but gold has lost 75% of its value compared to Bitcoin. that the denominator matters here. Well, okay, Pastor, then maybe I need to go further out on the risk curve, right? We're skipping the dollars, I guess, in bonds. Maybe I need to buy stocks, right? I need to buy, SPY, QQQ, whatever it is, because then that opens up bigger gains. Well, you could do that too, and you would do a little better. You would get 12% more, but you're still going to be down 63% compared to Bitcoin. And so even sort of the, hey, isn't gold, isn't the dollar, isn't bonds good, isn't even the stock market the place to run, if you will, compared to Bitcoin, the answer is no. You're losing out on purchasing power ability. So one more chart, two more charts on this, just kind of give you
and another real quickly, another observation on that chart is how well correlated those four assets you showed are. I mean, some did slightly better than others, right? The lines are higher, slightly lower, but right. On the whole, look at how correlated they are. So you could think your dollars are safe, and yet the same thing is essentially happening to your dollars as the bond market, as other things. So
you're good. You're good. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later too. So this is a similar chart with kind of just the same information, if you will. This is return on investment from a yearly basis. And so again, you can see gold does pretty well, but we're comparing what here? USD, right? So, wow, Pastor, if I was in the S&P for 14 years, that's 350%. Like, that's awesome. That's great. Okay, but then go look at Bitcoin over here. Look at the percentages here, right? Some of these are, I would say, we're well past the years of getting anything like this ever again. But nevertheless, even if you just take a 5-year perspective, right, we're still talking about the difference between 80 and 600% return here. So one more chart on that, or two more actually, sorry, I said that already. So this one is another sort of, hey, here's a 5-year chart. This is from in COVID, just through the halfway of this year, I believe, is when this was. And so what you're seeing here is that over that time, the negative 59% there, that's bonds. Bonds have actually gone down then by 59%. You've lost 60% of your purchasing power there. Real estate, that's gone down 36%. The SPY gone down 1%. Sure, the NASDAQ's up, the tech heavy sort of thing is up 32%. But look at Bitcoin, right? I mean, we're not even in the same ballpark here. That it's up 648%. Even if you go down to this lower bound here where it was low, I mean, we're still at more than almost 120% more. And so again, what we're talking about, denominator here, USD gains are good, are fine, but we're proposing to you that we need to think about the world in the lens of Bitcoin. And another reason for that is this chart, that Bitcoin is one of the best performing assets of the last 10 years. That it is, if it is truly the best performing asset, then we need to be measuring our purchasing power in the lens and in the value of Bitcoin itself. I'll stop there before I make anything else. Jared, so go ahead.
Yeah. A lot of times you'll see Bitcoin measured in the last decade and shorter increments. Meanwhile, it's 15 years old. And I asked myself once, are they hiding some bad years, some bad data? And the answer is actually no. If you were to include 2009 through the present, so 14, 15 year-ish now, these numbers actually get even more absurd to the point where it seems almost comical. And so I think what's often happened when people talk about Bitcoin in the last decade, they're actually making the Bitcoin numbers a little bit more sober, and yet even these more sober Bitcoin numbers, closer to the present as well, a closer snapshot to this time, to your chart here and all the charts you've shown, performs incredibly well. But you'll hear that the genesis of Bitcoin is 08, 09, this sort of time frame. But you'll often see on these charts a snapshot of the last 10 years, 2014 and forward, and soon enough, probably 2015 and forward. This is not hiding bad data. This is actually showing a more mature asset class with numbers that are actually a little bit more sober, even as they are still incredibly significant.
And And we should point out, sure, if you look at 2014, 2018, 2022, we could get into talking about the 4-year cycle and how it does seem to be somewhat predictable that Bitcoin has these regular drawdowns 58%, 74%, 64%. But the big thing for finance committee, right? They're not thinking about how can we time the market to get in and to make a little bit of money. They're not day traders. Finance committees are not interested in day trading. They're interested in long-term gains. So look at the cumulative return, look at the annualized return. As far as an asset class, there is nothing else that can touch Bitcoin, period. That's why that's why we do this podcast, because we have personally experienced how ridiculous the returns are. My returns, frankly, uh, since I've been in Bitcoin, have been on average annualized out to about 100%. Um, so it's just ridiculous that every year compounding that you could get 100% return on your money over the course of 4, 6, 8 years.
Yeah. In fact, another chart or another measure that softens out the years and looks at more long-term holding would be the CAGR, the CAGR, compound annual growth rate. I actually pulled up a chart and plugged it in right before we met today. 10 years ago in 2013, Bitcoin on several occasions saw a price point of $630. So 2014, $630. Today, it's hovering right at 63,000. So kind of nice, fun numbers for us to actually work with and pipe into a CAGR calculator. 10 years, that's our unit of time, 10 different yearly periods, going from $630 to $63,000. And what that averages out to is a yearly compound annual growth rate of 58% and change, which is, to say that's healthy is to understate things. A lot of times, if we think of our 60-40 portfolio splits, on average, you're trying to look to somebody to help you find where to invest your money, your well-earned money, and you're looking at something like 7 to 10% gains. It classically was considered healthy. Now, again, with inflation having done what it has done and continues to do, you have to beat that. You personally have to beat that in your house. And you mentioned, Jared, earlier, going further and further out on the risk curve. Typically, to beat that, you have to look for riskier things, right? To do that, I mean, the ultimate risk would be to say, I'm going to Vegas. I'm going to gamble on black or red. It's a 50-50 whether I'm up or down. That, talk about risk. That would be risky, and you're going to either boom or bust with that. And that's a sad thing when hardworking people's trying to preserve their purchasing power and trying to grow it for other seasons in life, whether emergency or retirement or caring for those in retirement or caring for kids. Maybe all that's emergency. When inflation is otherwise outstripping your gains or pushing you into risky things, the three of us are sitting here saying, the returns of Bitcoin look like it must be somewhere out there on the risk curve, and we could talk about that. Our conviction, though, and I think I know this to a man here, says something like this: I actually, every paycheck, take a little bit of that paycheck and exchange it dollars for Bitcoin, because to me the dollars are far riskier. That denominator is constantly changing and they're melting. At least in Bitcoin, I have an asset that I can go to where the denominator is not changing. No one person or pool of people can change the rules. And that is not only a safer place for me to store those reserves, but it has grown then over time as well. And that's Wow, that's a wonderful combination if you can come to understand it. Yeah, it's a wonderful
So,
combination. My real world example, real quickly, would be that the church I last served, at the urging of the church body, at least our district church body, said you should have emergency reserve assets. And when I started there, we didn't. And we finally got to the point where we had 3 months. With 3 months emergency cash reserves, that really helped us at some times when a roof leaked, when a boiler blew or a furnace blew, in this type of case. And we would spend from it and then we would reconstitute it. But I do notice this over time. That 3 month reserve, it being held in dollars, would never on its own have a fighting chance of growing to a 6 month reserve. But it gets worse than that, in fact. Year by year, they'd have to probably, due to both growing budget of ministry, in some sense, hopefully, many years, hopefully it's growing. Maybe not always and forever, but hopefully maybe it's growing, but also reduced purchasing power of those dollars, which is forcing at times the budget to grow. So your budget can grow due to inflation, but your budget can grow due also to expanded ministry. In either case, it seems likely that church budgets are growing. And note that you're going to constantly have to chase that 3 months reserve or chase that 6 month reserve. Whereas we're talking about another asset where you could constitute it at 3 months, let's say, and it could grow over time on its own to where it's 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. How wonderful would that be for a finance committee?
So, if you're listening to this and you're a trained financial person, your first thought, if you haven't thought already, should be, aren't you a pastor? What are you doing talking about money? Like, I'm not going to listen to you, But so I want to point you to two reports. We'll put these in the description. First, from BlackRock, who is the world's largest asset manager. World's largest asset manager. I'll say that one more time. The world's largest asset manager. And they just came out with the report. And David, do you know exactly what you were talking about? They said the same thing. They argued that Bitcoin is not a risk asset as it has typically been defined. That in short correlated moments, which this is one of the charts from that report, that does it respond negatively like a lot of things? Yes. But then in the long term, it is very uncorrelated to any other asset. In fact, some people even call Bitcoin, they say this in the report, that they think some people treat it as a flight to safety. That, well, some people, if they are trading, it's the stock market is crashing, call my broker, get me in dollars fast, sell everything, get rid of it all. I need dollars right now. Some people say, I can't afford to have anything but Bitcoin. Get me more Bitcoin right now. And so BlackRock, this is not just me, local little pastor guy. This is big financial broker in the world saying Bitcoin is not risky in the same sense of the word that we might think it is. That I think they might even say, David, to your point, to say I'm going to go further out on the risk curve and get some Bitcoin would be a misnomer. That I'm going to go get some Bitcoin for a different reason altogether. That we might put this, say they might not say this, that it is less risky. I'm going to get a less risky thing to hold. And so what the chart you're looking at is them trying to show that to you. So they put some big sort of events that have happened over the last 4 years, if you want to call it that. And so COVID is a great example, right? So 10 days after the COVID sort of shut down, Bitcoin is down 25%, right? Very, very low. But then in 60 days, it's not just covered that, loss, but it's actually up 21%, right? That it's a V-shaped sort of recovery there. And then you can see sort of how the other ones here, they all have a similar theme though, that Bitcoin might correlate down, but it is most certainly, in the words of someone in the financial world, the fastest horse out of that race, so to say, into the future. One more thing that they show in that chart is this, that even BlackRock talks about the United States debt. And so you can, there's kind of a projected date here, right? So that the more deficit that they think we're going to have is just going to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow and grow and grow, that we're not going to spend our way out of this, right? And so what's going to be required is of the government to make more of those USD denominated dollars, which then, what we've talked about already, loses our purchasing power over time, right? And so they're even saying, the world's largest financial manager, hey, people are buying Bitcoin because of the United States debt problem. Not that we think the dollar is going to necessarily blow up, but just that even to service the debt we have is going to require them to print more, to make more of them. So that's BlackRock, the world's largest financial manager. I'll say it again. But I want to show you something from Bitwise. They're probably a little bit more niche, do a lot of crypto stuff. We like what they do with Bitcoin. And what they do in their report is they talk about what place does Bitcoin have in a traditional 60-40 portfolio. So this is traditionally, help me, I think this is right, 60% bonds and 40% stocks. I got that right? Other way around? So 60% stocks, 40% bonds. Yep. And the idea is that usually when stocks go up, bonds go down, and when stocks go down, bonds go up. And the idea is that you kind of manage some of your up and down volatility, if you will, by having things that are offset from each other. But just like we saw a little bit ago, if you denominate both of those things in Bitcoin, they're both going down. And so, well, then what do we do? And so in this report, they walk through, and we'll put the link down there, you can read it yourself. They walk through what is a good volatility sort of, what is a good, here's an investment word, Sharpe ratio. What's the best sort of risk for reward on the Sharpe ratio? So a good analogy for that, if you're not into the investing world, the higher the Sharpe ratio, the better. So it's a formula that they use. Basically, what we're trying to do is, what's the maxed reward that I can get for the dollar that I'm going to put into something? So a good analogy for us, let's say, so at St. Link, we're going to have a fall family night. Should we do that? Or should we have a trunk or treat event? Well, which one is going to require the most amount of work and energy versus the reward that we're going to get on the other end of that, whatever our goal is? And the Sharpe ratio is going to tell you, well, this event or this thing is going to give you more reward, more bang for your buck with the same amount of risk that you're taking to do it. Okay. And so what they're trying to do is provide you, the person who's reading their report, sort of with the optimal exposure, if you will. And so two charts from that. First, here, one, they show a portfolio, the traditional 60-40 portfolio, and then a 1, a 2.5, and a 5% Bitcoin allocation. I believe this is quarterly indexing, and I know it says with and without, but I think this is a quarterly rebalance portfolio. So that just means you, at the end of your quarter, you rebalance whatever your percentages are. So if Bitcoin is 5 and it's only supposed to be 2, then you rebalance down into whatever else you're trying to do. So let's at the end here, you can see that the traditional sort of, this is a 60-40 traditional portfolio over all of these years from 2014 would be up 50%. Again, that sounds good, right? We're denominating in dollars. Okay, great. But with just a 5%, we're almost at 150% increase. And that is like 3 times as much, right? From where a 0% Bitcoin allocation. And here's the same things, the percentages here. And so you see the Sharpe ratio here that I was talking about. The regular 60-40 portfolio has a Sharpe ratio of only 0.29, but a 5% Bitcoin allocation has a 0.645. And the maximum drawdown there is not that much more. And I think this is what speaks maybe to a lot of people here, that if you're new to this and you look at anyone and say, hey, I'm thinking about buying Bitcoin, they might say, you're crazy. Don't you know it goes down 70, 80, 90%? Why would you want to do that? Yeah, sure, we could talk about holding for the long time. But even with a quarterly rebalancing of your portfolio, which again, we could say maybe you shouldn't do that. It's just better to hold it over the long term. That even with that, your maximum drawdown is only going to be 25% if you assume that you quarterly rebalance that. So let's do one more sort of chart like this. So, this is really small. 1 second here. Let me get this bigger. So this is from a website called the Nakamoto Portfolio. And what it does is it walks through there's a whole bunch of stats on here. But what I've pulled up for you is what I think what most conservative investment people might hold. And so this is a conservative, basically a conservative fund. And so you can see they hold long-term bonds at 40%. They hold this total stock market ETF and 30%, some other bonds, gold, and then commodities, right? So this is a very conservative thing. And then what this does is it tells you, again, quarterly rebalance, it tells you what's going to be our return with a 1% Bitcoin allocation, a 5%, and a 10% Bitcoin allocation. And so let's scroll down here. So on a 5-year return, this portfolio without any Bitcoin is going to get you 13%. And again, why is this important? We're talking about money for ministry, money for mission. We're talking about doing your work as your specific organization. This is going to protect 13% of your purchasing power. But if you put, was it 15% right? 10% into Bitcoin, you're going to get 45% back. And that's 10% while also still holding all of those very conservative sort of things. And our drawdown only goes from 15 to 20% max drawdown, assuming that you're going to, again, cash out at the very bottom somehow, need to spend that money at the very bottom. And so why do I show this to you? Why do I think this is important? Because, well, we might say we're all in on Bitcoin, that some people would probably look at our allocation percentages to Bitcoin and think we're insane, crazy, and ludicrous, that you don't have to do that to have a portion of Bitcoin help you do what Bitcoin does best. And I would even go further and say that once you see what Bitcoin does to your regular portfolio, you're actually going to want more of it, not less of it. And so what I'm trying to show you here is that, hey, this doesn't have to be now I need to sell everything and buy Bitcoin. That even 1, even 5, even 10% of a portfolio is extremely meaningful difference in total returns and total empowerment for the future, right? That this not just protecting the past, but we're empowering ministry into the future. So, guys, what do you have to say? I just talked a lot. What do you see? What do you like? What do you not like?
That was great.
So good.
Bravo on all the research you did and then pulling it forward. I love that. I would only add to this because I think it could be a concern. It could be what about? You're talking about maybe emergency funds and not just ministry funds, but emergency. What about the liquidity? How liquid is Bitcoin? Which is a great question. In other words, you've taken the time to roll it out of cash into something else. How quickly can we get it back to cash to pay for that new roof, that new boiler, or whatever it is? Fair question, great question. I cannot speak to this institutionally, either from the nonprofit I serve nor churches I've previously served, because we didn't get there. If I were the head of finance committee for a church, I would like, or a pastor at a church, I'd be wanting to bring up this whole conversation as you desire to, I know, Jared. A couple things, but personally, my wife and I have saved more in Bitcoin in the last 5 years at just putting in meager amounts. Yet we've done more in the last 5 years than in the 16 years of marriage prior to that. Far and away. In part because it is slightly less liquid. I did change it from one thing to another, and to bring it back to the dollar, I would have to go through a little bit of a process, but that actually helped us in our savings. Whereas when it was just sitting in the savings account, guess what? We were tempted to spend it. It wasn't sequestered as well. So I would say this, as a family, we have benefited from the fact that it is ever so slightly less liquid than the dollar itself. We have changed it into something else where we now protect that and we want to see it grow. We're prepared to go to it if and when we need to, but we just haven't been tempted to use it and possibly even abuse it like before. So that's one part of it. I think the fact that it is not US dollar actually has helped us amass that reserve that we now have. That's one thing. But second of all, it turns out it is still very, very liquid. It is not an issue turning your BTC back into US dollars. In fact, the US, what did I hear recently? I don't know. Basically, Bitcoin, you can buy it, you can sell it, you can transact in it every day of the week. Unlike the banking industry, it does not close for weekends and holidays. It is there. In that sense, it is actually more liquid and available than our actual banking system in America and much of the pipelines for that. But I store up some of my property taxes in Bitcoin and then cash it out twice a year to spend on property taxes. And it takes a day of intentionality. It takes a day of intentionality to rotate it from one to the other, or less than a day. But I put on the calendar a day to do so. But I think that is an important thing to mention if we really want to kind of push to the side kind of the whatabouts, the perceived blockages here or hurdles, and push that aside. So that's all I would add to the conversation is a brief conversation about liquidity.
Yeah, my add-on would be, and Jared, you and I talked a little bit about this. I did a little research on FASB. It's FASB, the Financial Accounting Standards Board. So if you're a finance person, you might be thinking about this from a finance perspective, from a GAAP perspective, right? General accepted accounting practice rules, and you're asking yourself, how do we even account for this? Is there a way to account for Bitcoin on a balance sheet? Well, Bitcoin in many ways, I think, has been regarded as a Wild West asset. And I want you to rethink that. And here's why. So Jared mentioned that BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, has strong opinions about Bitcoin that are positive. FASB, the Financial Accounting Standards Board, has a ruling about crypto assets and specifically about Bitcoin. And here it is. So FASB is the one that sets the GAAP principles. And a couple of years ago, their rule was that if you had Bitcoin on your balance sheet, you had to mark it down as your cost basis less impairment. Here's what that means, and accountants probably are following this: cost less impairment. You know exactly what I mean. But for a person that's not an accountant, what that means is that basically, if you bought Bitcoin at, let's say, 2017, and then in 2018 it went way down, even if you held into 2019 and to 2020 when it starts going back up, from a perspective on your balance sheet, you were required to state that you bought Bitcoin at the price which you paid for it, minus all those drawdowns, and you're not allowed to list it as worth more, even if the asset has gone up. Well, you can imagine that institutions would not very much want to hold Bitcoin if they had to always account for it on a cost less impairment basis. But in December of 2023, FASB changed their rule that you hold the asset on your balance sheet at the value of it currently, and you can each quarter you state what the value of your Bitcoin is on your balance sheet, and much like all other assets, you simply can list it as its fair cost value. So that's to say, GAAP actually has a positive way, a Bitcoin friendly way of accounting for having Bitcoin on your balance sheet. That ought to tell you that this is not a Wild West asset anymore. This is something that general accounting principles actually take into account and are not unfavorably disposed to. So that's super important. The big question I think in my mind is if I'm a finance person is okay, guys, I'm in. I'm interested. I'll do your 1% allocation, or let's get crazy and do a 5% allocation. How do we do that? That might be a whole other episode. Um, and I think the fun thing about Bitcoin is that you could create all kinds of rules about how you keep Bitcoin on your books. And it doesn't just mean that you buy a Bitcoin ETF, because my hunch is that finance committee, wherever you have your reserves, they are so conservative and frankly so behind the times that they don't allow you to buy a Bitcoin ETF. Um, so you might have to go out on the open market and buy Bitcoin. That's not that scary. All three of us do this all the time. And another episode, another day, we can talk through how to allocate and the actual. If you're convinced that we made a good case, there's a whole nother episode that we need to take you through on how to custody it, and especially how institutions, how ministries, how nonprofits should custody Bitcoin.
So let's try and rewind, review here what we talked about, right? Why is money important? It empowers our vision, mission, right? We pay the people that serve, give their time to us. It is what we do use and need to do the things that we do. And what's the problem though with that is that our fears of trying to make sure we don't lose money, that the US dollar value doesn't go down, have caused us to miss what is the real problem. That our purchasing power and thus our ability to do our mission and vision have gone down over time because we've been denominating things in the dollar. And so, what we propose to you today is that every investment, every choice that you make for storing your time, your value, your ministry's sort of ability to do things with money should be denominated and or checked against Bitcoin. Every stock, every bond, everything should be denominated in Bitcoin to say, hey, if I'm going to buy this, then it needs to do better than Bitcoin. But we've also told you that it doesn't have to be an all-in sort of thing. That as a pastor of a church that cares for these people, I would be happy if they came to me and said, hey, we want to do 1%. Awesome. Great. They come to me to say 10%. Amazing. Even better. But it does not have to be an all-in sort of thing. But it's why we're here week after week. It's why we're here doing what we do. That this is not we want every church to have the biggest stockpile, that we want every church to be rich in the eyes of the world. We want every nonprofit, every church to have money to be able to do the gospel work of Jesus in this world for their neighbor, for the person who doesn't know him, so that they might know Jesus and then have the gifts that he gives to them. That is why we're here. That is why we're having this conversation. So, if you're listening to this and you have any further questions, if there's something we just completely forgot, if you think there's hey, I gotcha, what about this thing? Please leave a comment, send us a note somehow. But we really would love to hear from you, both what you thought and any sort of questions that you might have afterwards. So it has been great to be here with you. Hopefully you've made it all the way here to the end. Kudos to you if you did. And we will see you on the next one.